This conference will now be recorded.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Brian Weaver. I'm the Vice President of Sales at NSA. And today our webinar series is number 41, and it is on the importance of an annual network systems review. Today's session is being recorded, and everybody will receive a recording of today's session. I'd like to change it up just a little bit for this particular session. Really love to see if we can't get some interaction from folks. I would ask that you actively use the chat to ask any questions or things that are top of mind in regard to your network with your company. And we'll have our presenter, Glenn Bell, go ahead and address those as we kind of go through things. And with that, we'll move on to the next slide. And I'm going to go off camera and I will introduce Glenn, our presenter. So Glenn is a senior technical consultant with NSA. He's got 25 years of experience with Microsoft and networking, VMware, internet technology. He's led cloud-related migrations, and he's got a high degree of knowledge in Office 365 and email message flows. He's been with NSA through the acquisition of MCI that we had a couple of years ago, and he's a real expert in this particular area. And we'll go on to the next slide. A little bit about NSA for those that may not be familiar. NSA was founded in 1984. We've actually been involved with Infor's distribution ERP solutions by many names since that time. We were the first value-added reseller of Infor's distribution ERP solution, and continue to be dominant in the space as far as our number of technicians and so forth that we have, and with both distribution expertise as well as the ERP software. Special thing about NSA is we like to call it the NSA touch, which is our personal commitment to the success of our clients. We strive, all of us, to go above and beyond expectation in any of our engagements that we have. We were the first alliance partner designation from Infor, which means that we can work with Infor direct accounts as well as we continue to move forward with a number of different initiatives. We have, this number continues to change, I think this is even dated, 15 full-time business consultants. I think we're up to 17 now. They all have come to NSA with a lot of experience, and those have been with NSA for quite a while. So we average a minimum of 15 years with 22 plus years in the distribution arena. And with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to you, Glenn.
Well, thank you very much, Brian, and thank you all for joining today. And as Brian did mention, feel free to participate in chat. I'll hit those when able, and certainly there'll be Q&A at the end. So we'll try to capture any questions you have, and if there's anything we can address, certainly within the the time frame of this session, absolutely we'll pursue afterwards to follow up and see where we can assist. So before we jump right into the session, I'd like to just go over a couple of the technology solutions that NSA offers. We're very well known in our ERP area and arena, and for some, they may not be aware that we're a full network integration company as well. So I just want to touch on a few points, and we won't go deep dive on any of this, but just go through a couple of them here. Enhanced firewall and antivirus solutions, certainly very into email flow. As Brian mentioned, I've spent a great deal of time in that, and several others in our company also. Multi-factor protected VPN solutions, that's a real hot button these days with cyber insurance, and we've been certainly doing an awful lot of that. Some people aren't aware that you can actually multi-factor access to your servers on premise. So whether that's people coming inside to the organization or from inside, your admins going to a server, that type of thing, we can lock that down now with multi-factor authentication. So those are some other services we have. Certainly operating system setup, migration upgrades, cloud hosting, whether that's Azure or many of the other cloud hosting solutions out there. We're very involved in migrations for those things. Assistance with Active Directory and group policies. I've been very involved in that in my life, and several of us in our company have as well. Just a few more. As I mentioned, Mailflow migrations, Office 365. I've done more migrations now than I have fingers and toes, certainly, of all different sizes of company. Full network backup solutions, whether that's including, backing up Office 365 data for some people aren't aware that Office 365 doesn't actually back up your data, so that's a bit of a point there. Certainly, all the cloud tenant data can be backed up, Teams, SharePoint, OneDrive, all that kind of stuff, services we're involved in. Network topology planning, Wi-Fi assistance, remote access solutions, and managed services I'll be talking about later within the context of this presentation as well. Last on the list there, Linux and Unix assistance. We've actually got quite a lot of skills in this department, and seems to be a rare thing out there. So if you do have challenges in terms of send mail flow, Linux operating systems, we do have some assistance we can offer you there. So with that said, I'm going to go right into our annual network system review, and to kind of outline a little bit about what I hope to get out of these reviews. You know, there's sort of 4 categories that I shoot for. Certainly performance, gaining performance throughout the network where we can find opportunities to rebalance, certainly in virtual environments and things like that. So we'll talk about that. There's a number of other areas where we can gain ERP performance as well. Security, paramount, right? I mean, the Kaseya attacks and all the types of attacks we've been hearing, you know, over the past few years, they've just kept increasing. Cyber insurance is skyrocketing in terms of price, or having increased requirements of people to obtain that. And then data preservation. This is one I'm going to be really kind of hitting quite a bit. I really don't see a role for an admin that exceeds that of, you know, preserving data. It's absolutely critical. That's kind of what they're going to, you know, back for the, you know, to the security point. That's really what they're going after right now, because they realize that this is something that can bring down a company, right? So data preservation is absolutely critical. And in an annual way, there's opportunities to look at and review and to make sure we're doing what we think we're doing there. Strategic planning is what I consider to be the fun part of doing one of these reviews. And sometimes it's actually the area where you get the most out of it. Because as you go through the network and you go through all the pieces and parts and things that we'll be talking about today, we get a real good understanding of what we have and where we are, right? And when you know where you are, you're at the best position ever to now start to look to say, hey, where do we want to go? And what do we need to do? And what kind of things do we need to start putting in place to achieve that? So with that, I'm going to go into the categories that I'll be reviewing specifically through the annual network system review. So network and infrastructure, that's our pieces and parts, right? I mean, that's kind of our connectivity, the things that bring our network together, routers, switches, cabling to a degree, all that sort of stuff, right? It's the data plumbing, I guess, if you will. And we'll certainly go through some of the key points on those. Internet speed and health at all locations. We are now in an increasing need for, you know, reliable internet. More and more of our services are going out of the building, right? Whether or not that's a migration from, you know, an on-prem mail system to Office 365, that's a very common one and certainly a dominant process. But our ERP software, many of our on-prem systems, and indeed our entire networks in some cases are leaving the building, right? So internet is critical. So a few things we can look at there to make sure that some of those, you know, that connectivity is where we need it to be. Servers, PCs, and authentication services, we know we can't leave our server OSs stagnant, right? And our PCs as well. You know, 2008 R2 is an ancient operating system. It's one I still see out there. And it can't really be protected in any reasonable way with antivirus. It may have it installed on it, but I assure you it's not doing what you think it is. We know we have to move forward on those operating systems, but authentication services is another area too. For many people, there's authentication services both on-premise with Microsoft's Active Directory. There's authentication services in Office 365 or in Azure if you're hosting there, so Azure AD. In many cases, those authentication systems are actually connected together. So there's some things we'll look at there too. Data and backups, yeah, I mean, I mentioned I'll keep kind of coming back to preserving data, right? So data, we have to know that we have the amount of volume of data of storage that we need to handle our data for now and for the year ahead. And certainly we have to account for our backups and making sure that they're doing what we think they're doing and that we can, you know, actually restore. things like that. So we'll talk on that. VMware or Hypervisor, whether that's VMware, Hyper-V in an on-premise environment or even cloud environments, there's a number of things to look at in an annual way in that environment too, for that infrastructure. And we'll touch on those, and we'll even talk about a few Achilles heel type items that can kind of get you in trouble that we can look to see if we can avoid. Mail flow. Mail flow is near and dear to my heart. I'm very well versed in it. I've worked with every version of Exchange since inception. I've migrated, upgraded, just across the board. I'm very deep into mail flow. That said, mail flow, when it started, it's not a messaging system anymore. It used to at one time be very much that. It was almost like more like what chat is today, right? But it's straight up business flow now, right? It's moving our invoices. We have copiers pulling data and scans and going after our customers. We've got all kinds of things going on there. So we're going to look at some things to look at again in an annual way, and also how to protect some of that mail flow as we go through. Licensing and compliance. Well, that's something that that you might do, I guess, and that's really dependent upon where you're at with it and how up to date you are. What I can tell you, and we'll talk a bit more about it, is when VMware and Microsoft come and knocking at your door to do an audit, and they do, there's some you're going to want to have your ducks in a row. So we'll talk a bit about that. Last on the list, managed services. I like to call that a little bit of help for the admin. Admins these days, they've always got 3 or 4 fires going, and there's the one off in the distance that they want to get to and can't. So we'll talk about some of the ways that we can help the admin out, and also be very proactive about preventing issues before they happen with good alerting and services related to that. So we're going to jump into networking and infrastructure. And again, I'll just ring that bell to say, if anybody does have any questions, or if there's anything you want to bring forth, certainly, again, we will follow up with Q&A at the end, but just letting you know to feel free. So network and infrastructure, right? Firewalls, top of our list in terms of our network and infrastructure. They tend to have a life cycle, right? I mean, it's kind of like internet years or dog years. I kind of look at them as a 5-year cycle. Technology changes an awful lot in the span of 5 years in the technology related to firewalls. And we really want to be able to stay on top of that. To that point, there's also things that we look at in terms of an annual way as the firewall rules themselves. So the rules on our firewalls, one thing that I've observed over the years, and this is really, really common, is, our network changes, right? Servers come, they go, test servers come in, different things happen. A lot of processes go through change through a given year. And one thing that I tend to notice is that the firewall rules don't, right? So firewall rules often get forgotten. So now what we have is, different types of traffic pointed at the IP address of a system or server that doesn't exist anymore and is now occupied because we always rededicate those IPs. Now it's pointing to something else that's neither hardened for it or related to that kind of traffic. So it can introduce security holes. So very important to take a look at your firewall rules and see that they match what you actually intend them to be doing, and if they're current to the devices that you have. Firmware and updates, I don't care what version, or what flavor of firewall you have. It could be Cisco, Sophos, really doesn't matter. They all get firmware updates, and most often they're related to security updates. Now I get that, people aren't going to go out every month and be on top of this, but in an annual way, it's very important to be able to capture some of those and see if there's relevant security updates that are significant that need to be applied to your devices. Backup configs, I'd raise the question, do you have one? So if we make changes on that firewall, it's really important to save off a backup config of that configuration, because what tends to happen, and over the years I've seen this many times, the firewall just goes kaput, right? So it's down and you're down, right? And the most common solution or reaction to that typically is to sort of rush out and find the same firewall device as quickly as we can, and get that backup config if we have one back online, right? So having that backup config is really important. But to that point, you may not be able to get that same device as quickly as you think, particularly now with a lot of the challenges in terms of getting product. So keep in mind that backup config oftentimes just can be converted to a text file, and you can read the rules and things visibly from that config. And if you end up with a different flavor of firewall, it's very, very useful for helping you get back on your feet. Strategic, I mentioned the sort of the 4 categories on the front, right? So we had performance and a few different points, or data preservation and so forth. And strategic was our last on the list. And to that point, strategic for this point is failover firewalls. Many of you may have them now, or you may not. But again, as we start looking to the year ahead, what are our plans? Are we moving more and more out of the building? Are we more dependent on our network infrastructure and connections? Or what it really comes down, the simplest boiled down statement to this is, how long can you afford to be down, right? So strategic on this is having firewalls. And if you don't have a good firewall solution that lends itself to failover and onto a second device, we like Sophos products. It's one that we run with quite often, where we can have a pair of devices. And to the point of the firmware and updates, that's a common thing, as I say, that the firmware doesn't get updated. And one of the reasons is because, when can you really shut that down? It's going to be 8 o'clock at night or something. There's some hesitation on an admin's part to go apply a firmware and then have a problem, right, and not come back up. When you have failover firewalls, it's very easy to go and apply it to your standby device, get the firmware up, make sure it's good, fail over to it. You can do this during the day typically if it's just a momentary interruption, or certainly without as much fear or concern of problems arising. So you can fail over to that device, make sure things are right, and if they are, you carry on and go do the other one. If not, you fail back quickly and then find out what your challenges are. So strategic, that's definitely a direction to consider. Switches and wireless access points. Switches have firmware updates too, right? But we tend to just pursue those when there's issues or if there's issues. So not so much in that regard, but our wireless access points are very much more like our firewalls in terms of those internet years or dog years, if you will. So I kind of look at that again, sort of a 5-year window. A lot of technology does change over a period of 5 years in a wireless environment. Performance gains to be had there, security gains to be had there. And just to a side note, it's an opportunity to look at your config, look at maybe your guest Wi-Fi setup if you have one, and look to see whether or not, or ensure that you basically your guest Wi-Fi is providing access to the people that visit you and to offer that service, but not to offer that connectivity right straight into your own existing network. So a few things there that can be looked at in that moment. So firewalls and VPNs, just by concept in terms of the way that we used to look at security, I kind of want to just talk to that for a brief moment, which is there's been a transition into a process called zero trust. And while this presentation won't be specifically about that, I do want to put it on your horizon. For many people, they're maybe already there or they're well on their way to it. But if you've not heard of the concepts of zero trust, it's something to start looking at. We used to look at our network security kind of like a castle scenario. That was an old paradigm that we often talked about. We had the castle with the high walls, to protect us, protect the net, the environment inside, right? And the drawbridge, going over the moat might have been your VPN, allowing in traffic into that in a secure way, right? But now the security shift is really to zero trust, which in a nutshell is trust no one, no access point, no person, no device, whether it's inside or outside the network. It's really just verifying connectivity to all network services all of the time for everybody. It doesn't mean that each person logs into a thing each and every time that they do it, but they do go through a process of multi-factor authenticating, which is just that additional verification method, be it a text to a phone or an app or or what have you, but adding that additional layer of security to verify a person and then give them access onto the resources. So that's a shift in network computing that's been in play for a while. So strategic, just another comment to that. I did mention multi-factor authentication, and within that arena, there's also a shift to biometric authentication, which is considered a gold standard. Nowadays, some of our multi-factor authentication methods that are available to us actually make it easier for the end user to authenticate into the environment. And not a lot of not a lot of security processes are that way, but it's getting so much better. So now the opportunity is for an end user to simply do a thumbprint or a face scan based on their device, and not really deal with passwords at all. So that's another thing on the horizon, and another area for strategic look ahead at things. Internet speed and health, kind of like network and infrastructure, but there are a couple things I'd like to point out here. One thing that I've seen over the years is we've had a few circumstances, and one even fairly recently, where somebody had said that they felt that one of their locations on their network was consuming a lot more bandwidth, or they thought it was, because everybody was so much slower. There's some pretty simple tests you can do across your connections to find out and verify the health of those connections. And in this case, it just turned out that they're dropping about 30 or 40% of their packets, i.e. traffic, due to a device. In their case, just a reset of that device resolved that, but it had been going on for months, but as we look to our internet and speed at all the different locations, we'll also keep in mind, that a while back when we went shopping for our internet connections, it's very common to have what's called, asynchronous connections. So your download was faster than your upload, right? And that is kind of moving and changing in the industry a lot. There's a lot of improvements in terms of bandwidth and things to be had. So there may be opportunities to look to better connections, particularly in view of what our plans might be for the year ahead. Again, if we're moving more and more services out and we need to have access to services on the internet. So just to highlight that point too, in a wide area network, most of the connections these days are all through a type of secure VPN tunnel that leverages the internet for its connections. So, kind of gone are the days where we used to use telco connections in their own, it still exists, but by and large, we're consuming internet to do that as well. So general network performance is improved. Strategic on this side, redundant internet. So at what point, going back to that kind of simple question of, how long can you be down for, right? We actually had somebody fairly recently here that was down for, and this doesn't happen that much anymore, but 2 days. Like, that's pretty untenable for most people anymore. So there's some consideration there to you might want to look to see, again, considering what services you might have out of your network and all the rest, is how valuable a resource is that internet to you. Going back to the firewalls, those Sophos firewalls, for example, as just one example, but certainly we have models of those that are perfectly capable of handling that redundant internet connection at that device level. If you are already fairly new in your technology cycle on your device, though, there's other devices you can put in front to add that redundant internet. Servers, PCs, and authentication services, right? I mentioned operating systems. Got to highlight this point. It's a pet point that a lot of my coworkers are probably tired of hearing me say, but 2008 R2 that needs to go. It is an absolute security threat. It's a threat vector into your network. It can't be properly protected anymore. The antivirus that may or may not be installed on at this point, you really can't buy anything suitable for it anymore. But if you have AV and it's been trucking along all this time and doing whatever, I assure you it's not doing very much. The operating system just doesn't have enough. It's not under support from Microsoft, and so there's not the proper security updates and the processes inside that would be hardened under much more modern operating systems simply aren't there. So do consider that, moving forward in your Windows environment is very important. We're well along the path. That one should definitely be gone. 2012 R2 is actually an old operating system at this point. It's a few operating systems ago already at this point. So anyway, just to highlight that point, but we know we need to keep moving forward. We do in a network, in an annual way, though, want to make sure that whatever operating systems we have, that we do have the protections in place that we think we do. This is often uncovered in going through a review. We find that some devices were made or added, and then our changes are made, and the AV or the malware protection wasn't applied. So it just happens. There's lots of irons in the fire, and things come up, and that's what you hope to find out is done. Is to reveal some of these issues and address them. So strategic, though, on this point, I would say these days with good viral protection, you really want to look to antivirus products that actually integrate or have a relationship with your firewall. That's a newer type of process, but having a firewall that has good insight to your endpoints is really a leg up in security, right? So we have a lot of different traffic coming in and out of our network that our firewall is aware of, and to have our firewall be aware of the endpoints and then seeing the kind of traffic that might be introduced from them into the network and have that insight, it is much more capable at shutting down a bad malware infection. So Sophos products, again, I'll highlight those. We're quite fond of that, and they do a great job of tying in that infrastructure. They made and have made that claim that the Kaseya attack, there was no instance of any endpoint that was protected by that became compromised during the Kaseya attacks, just as a +1 for them on that. So on-premise Active Directory, this is interesting kind of thing that I kind of run into a lot because I do a lot of AD work. But so typically in network environments, we do see, people go through and they'll upgrade their servers, ideally, hopefully, and frequently. But one thing that I see is that when the Active Directory servers or domain controllers get upgraded, for some reasons, there's sort of a missed point there where Active Directory itself doesn't get upgraded. And there's a whole lot of security benefits, and particularly some security benefits that relate to Office 365 integration and some other pieces just to do with structure for users and groups and different things. But you don't get or realize the benefits of those AD changes if you don't elevate that. So I always look for that. That's a double check. Just can't make the assumption that because the servers were upgraded that Active Directory was upgraded also. It's just far too frequent that I see that's not true. Along that point, who has administrator rights to the network? This is another just very annual kind of a thing to look at, right? People come and go and vendor relationships come and go. And oftentimes during projects, vendors are granted admin privileges to the network, ideally just to the server they need to work on, but I've often seen them to be general domain admin rights, just to make a thing work in the moment and it gets forgotten about. But also administrators come and go. And one thing that I see quite a lot is, the newer administrators don't have the legacy information or knowledge to know that, there's like 14 different, vendor relationships that all have some sort of credential on here, and they don't know what to get rid of, or they just don't know who's accessing what. So very important to review those administrator rights. And you know what? If you don't know who they are, shut them off and see who screams. And it's just what you got to do. So, it's just it's important to get control of that, and it's just one of those things that comes up in an annual way that can help to clean up and reduce some risk there. Sensitive file permissions too, yeah, your HR, that kind of thing, payroll and all the rest of that. It's the same kind of thing. People come and go. There's a lot of permissions out there. Do they make sense? That's kind of a personal project. I mean, you're going to be the people that know who should have access to what. But when going through an organized review of something, it's a good moment to say, hey, let's just take a look at our file shares and our file permissions and see if they're in line with what we expect them to be. So data and backups, right? I said I'd be kind of, pounding this drum a little bit here because, again, protecting our data is absolutely key, but having enough volume for our data is also really critical. In our on-premise systems, typically in a virtual environment where we have virtualized servers, and that's the norm these days, they're leveraging central storage, and these are just big buckets of highly redundant disk that are typically very highly resistant to failure with redundant systems throughout. But very key on this is, as the year has gone by and as we look to the year ahead, is do you have enough, data? Because I'll make this comment again in, when we talk about virtualization, but disk is life to your virtual environments. And if you run out, it brings down your systems. It does. So we want to be very aware that we have what we need for that and for our virtual environments. Backup systems, there's all kinds of different types of backup systems, and they often, it depends on the type of system you're using. In some cases, they're leveraging some of that central storage, ideally in separate volumes that are isolated, but in any case, they often are leveraging that central storage, so it's key to have enough for your backups as well. But in many cases, they will have their own storage, and so that needs to be reviewed. Again, what are our plans? Do we have more servers coming online this year? Or what do we, where are we at with our data? Or do we have good, do we have a lot of good restorable options in the amount of data that we have? So it's an opportunity to look at that and just make sure that you're where you think you need to be for your backups. On the note of backups in general, I kind of pose this question sometimes because it gets a little bit overlooked on occasion, which is backup alerting. Is it a call to action? And basically, I would make the statement that, you come in on Monday, you get an alert and it says backup successful, Tuesday backup successful. You get all these alerts, or notifications, successful, 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 right? But, you come in after a weekend and you have 150 plus emails or 200 plus emails, and you didn't get anything from your backup alerting, right? Because the system is down. So, is it a call to action? It's not if you don't get an alert, So the real, real important process, and something we highly recommend, is eyes on, minimum once a week. Having physical eyes on your backups, meaning log in, look at your backups, make sure that things are as you expect them to be. It's just an important part of the process. To the strategic side of this, consider managed services as a second set of eyes on your backups. Consider having someone else that manages your backups, and you can follow them too, but having two sets of eyes, oftentimes in different networks, and there's all different sizes of IT teams, and in some cases it's one person, and they go on vacation, and it's important to in some cases make sure that there's more than one person looking at these and making sure that they're okay. So just a couple of final notes on that. Are your backups complete? Right, so many systems will do auto adds. Essentially, you add a server and it will auto include it. If it's in a VMware environment, it'll see it, it'll pick it up, it'll start to back that up. Many of them also do not. So again, in an annual way, it's the opportunity to look at that and make sure that it's complete. And also, can you actually do a restore, right? I can understand why that isn't a process somebody does once a month or whatever, but you certainly on occasion should be considering going through the process to make sure you either know or understand how to go through and do a restore, and or if that's a successful process for you, even if it's in the cloud. And we've seen that happen where we go through a test Azure restores, for example, and it doesn't quite come up as we think it will, and there's some tweaks or things that have to be done, and ideally you want to know or do that or be aware of that before you actually need it at 8 o'clock at night. So VMware or Hypervisor, whether that's VMware, Hyper-V if you're in the Microsoft flavor of that, or if it's cloud hypervisors, a few things to look at here. And I'll just make the comment that a hypervisor is essentially the tools you use to manage your virtual environment, and your virtual environment runs on some systems that, you know, they have an operating system of their own, is I guess where I'm going with that, and they need to be updated and upgraded as well. And there's a relationship with those upgrades to the versions of operating systems that you're installing into them too. There's a chicken or egg thing that can happen there. So there was a time quite long ago now, but where introducing a newer operating system into one version of VMware at that time resulted in actually the system running fine for a day or two, and then failure of the system basically coming down just because there was some networking components that weren't supported that were introduced. And you know, it's typically fairly resistant. You can typically add the latest OS slightly over an older version of VMware, but that said, you know, there's stability issues to be seen there, and there's a relationship there. So you have to consider that you want to be on top of your upgrades there as well in an annual way. So performance, to that point, it's a great opportunity to look at your logs, go through and you know, look to rebalance resources based on needs. So if you've got a SQL Server that looks like it's needing more CPU or memory on other systems, which is often the case, it's an opportunity to allocate some of the resources you've already got in reserve, typically in a VMware environment, and to start to realize some of the improved performance, you know, moving forward from that time. I'm going to make a point on something here called snapshots, and I'll explain what they are, and I'll tell you, you know, the Achilles heel that is snapshots when they go bad. So snapshots are a wonderful technology. They're available in really any of the hypervisors, but basically it's kind of like a way back button, I'll say. When you take a snapshot, typically an admin will go in and he'll do what's called a snapshot, a moment in time, where it creates a fixed point, and then you can go about and do things like run Windows updates, run an upgrade on the operating system, and if things don't go well, if they go, you know, poorly, it can all be reverted back. So just by hitting that way back button, and it's a wonderful technology. It's very, very useful. But that said, there is a challenge with that. A snapshot will grow forever. And VMware, at least in its native environment, does not effectively, in a default way, tell you or caution you of a snapshot, for example, that's older than 6 months. And so anything that gets written in or out of that operating system, backups run, all the rest of that stuff, that file will grow and grow and grow. As I mentioned before, disk is life in virtual environments. If the data store that your servers are running on in this environment run out of disk, it comes down, and everything on that host, everything that's running on that, you know, that data store comes down. So very important to review those and see if you have any. And if it tweaks you in your mind to say, well, I've never created a snapshot, realize that in VMware environments, the backup processes that run create their own snapshots and remove them. And when they break, sometimes they leave them behind. So it's a cautionary tale on that and something to look for in an annual way. Just going to take a pause and just make sure everybody's doing all right. And again, if you have questions, we'll do Q&A in the end, but if you have anything else that I can address on the fly, I'll try to catch those. But until then, we'll go into mail flow. And as I mentioned before, mail flow is certainly business flow. Security is absolutely paramount. Right now, the absolute dominating mail system in the world really is Office 365. It's the vast majority now of people that are not running on-prem systems in terms of professional mail flow. So security for that environment is really, really paramount. I've seen so many different circumstances in that environment, from not running multi-factor authentication to account takeovers to you name it. I've seen it, cleaned it up, worked on it, fixed it. And I want to make a point here to say, if Microsoft is the only thing protecting your Office 365 tenants' mail flow, you really want to be looking. This would kind of go straight to the strategic point here, but you really want to be looking very hard at that and consider something more protective like Barracuda. There's Sophos products, but there's a few, but you definitely want to be looking to an MX-based solution that pre-sanitizes things before they arrive in your network and have insight into your O36 environment to be able to interpret those mail accounts and the typical patterns that are being used by your users so that you can help weed out phishing messages. To that point, I'm going to raise up a notch from strategic to the 70 to 90% statement on your slide here, which is that you can spend an hour and go look and try to find something that'll tell you it's less than somewhere between 70 and 90%. But really, all of the vast majority of the malicious breaches that happen in your network these days are coming from mail flow. They're not coming from that USB stick. You know, they're not coming from you know, the NPC so much that's going through a VPN and connecting into your network. While those are things you need to protect, your antivirus and your other solutions, the real big threat vector right now is phishing attacks, which are manipulating your end users into passing credentials that give them access to things. So that's a real hot button, and I just very much encourage you to look to protecting yourself in different ways, and we can certainly help with those things. Back to the point of mail flow and business flow, it's our life's blood anymore. You know, and so deliverability is really key. So there are some DNS technologies. I won't get deep and techie on this, but SPF, DKIM, and DMARC, those are processes that can help verify that the person sending mail on your domain is who you allow it to be. And DKIM and DMARC, they're involved in then setting choices about what to happen if they're not, things like that. There's a process that we can go through to look at these records and to what we call bring them into alignment. There's a process to help essentially increase the deliverability of your messages and the authenticity of your messages. So that's something that can be looked at in an annual way too, because you make changes in terms of who may be allowed to send. You might have, you know, marketing people sending on your behalf. You might have a vendor system sending on your domain, those kinds of things. And so they have to be accounted for. Just a little footnote here, Office 2013, like 2008 R2 as a server operating system, it's really dead. Its end of life has already happened. The extended support is going. It's not very well compatible with Office 365 anymore, for example, and it's no longer really effectively protecting itself too in terms of you know, mail flow and that kind of stuff. So so just as a footnote, if you have those, you really want to be moving off of it. Licensing and compliance, as I mentioned, well, that's very much a you know, kind of a choice. It's a thing that you might do. So if you're on top of it, maybe that's not a place you need to go. But again, back to those changes through the year, what I will say about it is that Microsoft and VMware, you already agreed to the audits by virtue of agreeing to the licenses. So what I think sometimes I hear from people is they don't, you know, they don't really think it happens that much because they're kind of involved with themselves. They're one company, and as somebody who's involved with many, many companies, I can tell you it happens. And said no one ever. It's a great time. I have nothing else going on, and it'd be just fine if I spend a week trying to go through all my stuff with Microsoft today, or this week, or whatever. And I guess what I'm trying to say is it comes upon you, and it's a task to be done. So you might consider kind of lining up and staying on top of those processes. They definitely happen more often than you might think, and they even happen to people more than once. So as we're nearing towards the end, I'd like to talk a little bit about managed services. As I mentioned, I kind of consider this a little bit of help for the admin. You know, there is admin fatigue out there. People are trying to do as much as they can with what they have, and always chasing problems. And so, you know, it's really important that that there's at least some effective alerting, right? Very common scenarios that I see all the time are low hard drives. Somebody's system runs out of disk at 8 o'clock at night. That type of thing. People come in the next morning and their server's down, and the way they find out about it, of course, is people telling them that they can't get to this, that, or the other thing, and then they have to find out why. You know, alerts are very effective at letting you know in advance, weeks in advance in some cases, that you need to just go allocate some disk in a virtual environment. It's very easy to do. Do it in the middle of the day, do it while it's running, no problems, crisis averted, right? That's just on the alerts themselves. Managed backups I mentioned too. You know, the managed backups is that second set of eyes, somebody actually resolving your backup issues and working with you on those, and you know, being that second set of eyes. It also brings you to server alerts and Windows updates. That can be a real bear for some people, you know, how to really go about getting your systems updated. And so there are some processes available that can take that out of your hands, basically have it happen within a maintenance window, evening hours, weekends, that kind of thing, and take it out of the hands of the admin. It's really a, you know, kind of a monotonous task. So the other thing too is that the people, you know, that are involved in running those updates have awareness and insight into those updates and know the ones not to install, which is a really kind of a big deal. So remediation also offers the ability to resolve issues on the fly, like handling, just adding that disk for you on the fly. So there's all kinds of levels to managed services, and it just make you aware that these are things that you can look at, and you can kind of look in an annual way as you go through a review to say, hey, there are areas that we might need a little bit of help on. You know, being able to be alerted about a service not starting or any of those kind of things can be very helpful. So with that, I'm just coming to a session summary on that. And we talked at the beginning, you know, a bit about sort of what we kind of hope to get out of it. Performance, you know, certainly our performance that we can gain from operating systems upgrades, from rebalancing our resources in virtual environments, and a few other things. Security, you know, ever important. We got to protect our Office 365 or our mail flow in general, regardless of what system is doing it, because it is the #1 threat vector to our networks. And data preservation, knowing again that you know, it's the Achilles heel for a business, because it's really what can really bring you down. We have to protect our data. So the opportunity to go through and look at those things. And then finally, strategic planning, where we now are at a position of saying, hey, we know the things we have and where we're at. And it's the perfect opportunity to now look and springboard into the future to say, what do we want to do and how do we want to do it? So I'd like to introduce also a special offer, because we do offer assistance doing these network reviews, and we've done a lot of network reviews in the past. I've been involved in many of them over the years. But NSA will conduct a no-risk discovery call. So if you'd like to be involved in that process, we can talk to you about the process of doing this, get an overview of your infrastructure and kind of outline our approach, right? And as an attendee of the webinar, certainly we'd like to offer you the discount of 10%, valid for 30 days on that deliverable. So with that, I'd like to open it up to questions and answers. My name, Glenn Bells, and contact information is on board, on deck, and available. And certainly if you have any questions that you might have, please go ahead and fire at will or enter them in chat.
Hey, Glenn, thank you so much for your presentation. And yeah, anyone looking to take advantage of that offer, please email Glenn. There's his contact information there. You know, certainly I think it makes sense to you know, kind of get a look at your existing system and get value out of that, not to mention if you elect to go forward the 10% discount. And you can certainly unmute your lines if you'd rather just ask verbally as opposed to through chat. Please do that. Glenn, I'll get us started here with questions. So you mentioned 70 to 90% of all of the attacks, you know, certainly come through phishing emails and so forth. Are there any types of systems or tools that are out there that can help to educate our staff or a company's staff in terms of knowing like what not to click on and that type of thing? What can be done in that arena to help educate our users so that the frequency of that is reduced?
Yeah, absolutely, Brian. There's a few tools we have in that regard. It can depend what kind of ecosystem you're in, and we can review and make specific suggestions. But the process is the same regardless of which particular vendor environment for this, which is, you know, it's very effective training in terms of producing essentially falsified, I guess I would say, or mock phishing messages. The process works by adding those out to, sending them out to your user base, and then your end users actually can start to interact with those messages. You can see who kind of gets into them, clicks on them, follows them through, and who doesn't. It'll educate the end user to that process. So it'll turn that around and say, hey, this was a false message. Things you might have looked for in this might have been mousing over the link to see if it's going where you think it is. It does an educational process for that. But key there is that it gives feedback, and so you can continue to work with these campaigns on your end users until they no longer start coming up with positives where they've clicked and followed through on those messages. That process is one that has good feedback to the admin and is helpful and educational to the end user.
Great, thank you for that. So we'll go ahead and just give folks another minute here just to see if anyone has any other questions before we kind of do a wrap. Okay, it looks like that we're all set. Glenn, I'd like to thank you for your time and effort on today's session, as well as those that attended the session. Again, please take advantage of your initial discussions on your network, as well as the 10% discount if you elect to move forward. I thank everybody for taking the time out of their day for attending today's session. And again, you will be getting a copy of the recorded session that should be coming out within the next 24 to 48 hours. Thank you so much for attending, all.
Thank you all, and thank you, Brian, as well.
Have a good rest of your day, folks.